reading in the Roman world. And well, it had different parts, and it just went through like how people started getting introduced to like reading and books. And the first part just like introduces the thing, and it says that like back then, um, not all people read, and like reading was like limited to just like priests and aristocrats. And uh, and then yeah, it was just like limited to the governing class in Rome. Yeah. And yeah, they used papyrus rolls wrapped in sheets of cedar bark, and the rolls were written in Greek and had philosophical and doctrinal content, and like some of them were in Latin as well. And the ones that were in Latin was like about like law and things like that. Um, how much detail do you want me to go into? Because like I can, if I want to go through every detail, then it would be like a very long summary. But like I can just like say like what each, like the general gist of each part. Like which one do you guys prefer?
I think the general gist is good enough
Just a
because
general thing. Okay.
if you read it,
Uh,
yeah.
oh, okay. So and the next part is the birth of the reading public, which basically talks about it goes through like libraries and how people had like private libraries, and then they started having like public libraries by time, and they were thinking that the existence of these different types of libraries indicated that people were reading more. So so like it wasn't only limited to priests and aristocrats anymore, and like more people were introduced to reading by that time. Um, and then and then it also mentioned that at time of the Roman civilization, that people were used to reading out loud, and reading out loud wasn't like allowed in libraries, because like in libraries you're supposed to like read to yourself. So um, um, and they also like thought that being able to reading something out loud was like this kind of talent, and you were like really good at reading if you were able to like read something out loud to other people, and it was some type of performance. So if you were able to read at that level, you were just like a, a very good reader basically, and not everyone could read at that level. And and then it gets to like how people actually read, because at that time books weren't like books today. They weren't like codex, and they were like just rolls that they had to like open like in the movies and to just read from them. And for doing that, they had to use like both of their hands, and they had to like have like a specific gesture. And um, and somewhere in the reading they mentioned that uh, like reading was so important that like people who were able to like read out loud to other people had to have like they had to be like very healthy, because it was mentioned in like um, doctor's notes from the past that like if this person was a person that who read out loud, like this person was like very healthy or something. um, and it was called expressive reading, the reading out loud to everyone else. Um, And it just said that like just because most of the books were handwritten back then, um, like different types of like writing, like semi-cursive or cursive, would just slow down some people because not everyone can read everyone else's handwriting. And I think I'm reading. And then for the next part of the reading is about the new spaces for reading, and it talks about how reading was getting more popular between people, and people were doing it like out of habit, and they were doing it for pleasure, not just because like it was something like religious or it was something that had to do with their work or something. They were just like uh, doing it out of like because they wanted to. And because of that, there were like different types of literature, like horoscopes, text, like um, games, um, books about sports and cooking and erotica and like everything, just like right now. Uh, um, and by that time, well, before that, women didn't really weren't really educated and they couldn't really read that much. But like after that, women started like reading, and it is shown in like different paintings or different ways that women are portrayed in the books of that time, that shows that women were usually like at home alone and they were just like reading, and then they usually didn't read out loud and they were just like reading slowly to themselves. But it showed that women were becoming more educated by that time. Um, and for the next part, it just talks about the codex, and it said that codex was a Roman invention, um, uh, and changing to codex happened in the like changing almost completely to codex happened in the early 5th century. But like before that, in the second and third and fourth century, like they were like gradually changing to codex. And it also mentioned the importance of Christianity and the use of codex, because Christianity and like Christian literature were like some of the first types of literature that like really changed to codex immediately. And um, and the reason for that was that codex was less expensive, and also reading it was like much easier. You could read it just like with one hand, because if you can hold a book in your like hand, one hand, you don't have to use both hands. And so it was like more appealing to the general public and also the less educated readers. um, and also they were able to like put much more amount of text in codex instead of just like rows, because in rows you had to just like most of the rows were like you had to just talk about one thing through the whole row, and then when the row was over you had to like change it and move through something else. But in codex you could talk about like many different things and many different uh, yeah, things. Hmm. And another thing that was interesting to me was that like gradually in the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth century, the literacy was on decline, and like people were becoming less literate compared to like before. And And then it mainly just talked about how codex changed the way people wrote literature or books, because like they had to, because they were like writing about different subjects, they had to introduce different types of reading, so that they had to use punctuations, they had to like bold something, they had to like go to like another page or something. And also codex made people able to make like small hand notes on the book. And being able to read a book with like all the notes that someone else has taken was like considered some like higher form of like reading, and also like being able to understand that was like very like high level, and like educated people could like read at that level mostly. And and it said that the reason that people started taking notes on their books about like their thoughts or their understanding of what they're reading was that codex made it able for people to write with one hand, because they didn't have to like use both hands while reading. And it's like generally that there are a lot of other like small things, but like I think I've mentioned the important parts. If you guys think I missed something, just like mention it and I can just explain it more.
I feel like that was good.
Okay.
I mean, I'm if everyone else agrees.
Were
Yeah,
you
that
guys
was
bored?
That was good. No, it was good.
Yeah, that was good. I'm just like writing stuff down.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so should we go through questions about this reading and then move on to the other readings, or should we go through like all the summaries and then all the questions?
I like the idea of actually doing the questions for
Okay.
each one as we go. I mean,
Okay,
that
sure,
makes sense to
sure.
me,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
All right, then let's. I keep losing the document. Right. Okay, where's so because you wrote questions yourself, right? So do you want to just go through the ones you wrote first?
Yeah. Well, my first question is that it's about the decline of literacy during the 3rd and 4th century, and I noticed that it happened the same time that like Christianity was kind of on the rise in terms of like books. Like it was like everywhere. It was everywhere. Like everyone were like doing codex and Christianity. And my question was that whether popularity of Christianity had anything to do with the decline in literacy, especially among women. So what do you guys think?
Okay, I'm gonna look at my notes first.
I have this question because like I've noticed every time like I'm not like anti-religion or anything. I respect it all, but like through history, anytime like religion happens in a place, like literacy go down, especially in women, and it's like I don't know. I think it really affects women, and I was just like it was just a question.
In my readings, there was like a similar point in which like reading and writing is only available for like the wealthy, right?
Yeah.
So most of the people didn't know how to do that. And so like one of my questions was actually like, is reading and writing a way for them to keep that control, you know, like because if you can, like if you know how to read and write, you can like only you know how to run certain things. If you didn't know how to do that, then you're completely, you're not even in the game, right?
Right.
As for like the Christianity part, hold on, let me think. So when in my readings it said before Christianity, the readings were mostly the poems of Homer, and they read a lot about like morals and ethics. They also read like I think someone else mentioned it, but like a lot of the poets and playwrights, stuff like that. But after Christianity, the Bible became what was studied in schools. So instead of like this progress towards like science um, and just progress in general, people become more focused on religion.
They were kind of going backward.
Yeah, so you become stagnant, and I guess in this case there's actually a decline.
Yeah.
But I don't know how. I don't really necessarily know how that decline happened, though, or like, nor can I explain why, especially in women.
Yeah, it's interesting you noticed that, because I didn't even realize that the timelines overlapped in terms of like the rise of Christianity and the decline of literacy. Because when the writing mentioned the decline of literacy, it didn't. I didn't really catch
exactly
why.
after they mentioned like the rise of Christianity, and I don't know if they're like related. Maybe it's just something that like happened, or they just like mention it after each other. But like the timing was like almost like Christianity happened, and then like they start, because like before that they were like, yeah, everyone was getting literate, like the general public was reading, and then Christianity happened, and no one was reading anymore. Women weren't reading anymore, and I was like, okay, what happened? Like, why the sudden decline?
Or it was just like, it's not like a random thought. I guess it's kind of related, but I feel like maybe it could have been related to like they would have been able to read, but it wasn't recorded because
Yeah, that could be
because
true.
of women's social status in society. Maybe that is because of Christianity, but I feel like women would have still been able to read, especially the ones in upper class, like as mentioned at the end of the first reading, like it said that she was reading the Bible and stuff. I feel like it just wasn't recorded as much because of, like, as I said before, like women's social status, I guess. Like like even in, like, let's say US history, I know this is kind of irrelevant, but then like woman really isn't in the history because it wasn't like recorded, right? And we don't really know what happened. I feel like it could be happening the same.
Yeah, that could be the case. It was also like mentioned in the first reading that even at that time that like people were getting more literate, men would say that you should only marry a woman who can like read less than you, and if a woman can like read very well, it's just she's not that attractive to like other men. So like I think there's like definitely what you say and exactly what Scott said, because about like power, I think men wanted to maintain power on women by like keeping them less educated than they were.
And
For
sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So what's kind of puzzling to me is like, if Christianity is becoming more popular and more people are reading the Bible, like why is literacy going down if people are more encouraged to read than ever?
I remember that in my reading it said that like people were just like they were like reading they weren't even reading the exact Bible, they were just reading like
These
like
excerpts.
yeah, like easy translations or easy things about the Bible, or like they had other people read it to them
Hmm.
because it was just hard for them to like read the actual Bible.
I didn't
Right.
really notice the link between like the decline of literacy and Christianity, but I understood that the decline of literacy what I understood was that maybe there was a decline in how many people were reading like really upper level texts like Homer and whatever, and because there was more like you said, people were
Easier
starting to
for
write things that were easier and meant for like the middle lower class. So my understanding was that there was just a decline in like an upper class
literacy.
only form of reading.
But like
Yeah,
lower class reading is still reading, right?
yeah,
So
exactly. So
Yeah.
that was confusing to me because technically
yeah.
more people were reading then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of related to what you're saying, but like you said, Scott, like so much of what I noticed was that um, social class was
Hmm.
so linked to literacy and power. Um, I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. And like the idea of accessibility to reading and who's allowed to read. And then I found it interesting that some parts said that like certain things were expected to be read in a certain way and understood in a certain way. Um, it just seems like more rigid, I guess.
Yeah.
The Yeah, less of like a pleasurable thing and just like
Yeah, I think they were like very rigid about like who could read and what they should read and how they should read
yeah,
that specific thing. And it was like, okay, just chill. Who cares?
yeah. I thought that was interesting because I never thought about that or knew about that. Um, and I also thought it was interesting how like this kind of relates more to what you were saying about women's literacy, but um, I thought it was so funny how they were saying how more texts were being produced for women about things that like they would be interested in, but I would assume that not a lot of women themselves were writing, and it was probably men just writing like romance stories. And it's interesting to think like that was the assumption that that was what all women wanted to read, as opposed to like maybe they're interested in other stuff. But
Yeah,
That
maybe
could be,
maybe
yeah.
ladies would like to read Homer as well.
yeah, come on. So I thought that was funny.
That
Odd.
could also be a way of like keeping power for
Mhm.
like on women because like they're like, yeah, just like dumb women just want to read romance. They don't read like
Yeah,
anything like profound. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, I think across the world, like they've been keeping women out of schools for like a long time, right? Like I don't think women
Even
were, yeah,
some places.
like it wasn't that long ago when like women weren't allowed to go to school.
Hmm.
So
For me,
nonetheless, like 2,000 years ago.
yeah, a lot of what I noticed when they were or the reading was talking about Christianity and literacy, I thought a lot about I I read something where maybe it was Frederick Douglass's autobiography, but basically he was talking about how, or something was talking about how um, for slaves it was important for them to learn to read, because then that meant that like the first thing that they did as soon as they understood how to read was to read the Bible for themselves, and that was kind of like the main goal of becoming literate, was to just be able to practice Christianity for yourself, as opposed to uh, having like a middleman between you and God,
Mm.
whereas like you're reading the Bible yourself, you're understanding the words yourself. Yeah, so that part made me think a lot about that. Um, just I guess the importance of being able to read the Bible for some people, and that being their connection to their religion. Um, yeah, it was Frederick Douglass's autobiography. I remember now. So a little off topic, but I thought about that.
Anything else or next question?
So should I go to my next question?
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that it was mentioned in this reading was that people learn to write before they learn to read.
Right.
And I just wonder how it can happen. Like, how can you like learn to like write a sentence without being able to read it? And like, because the way that we learn is just that we learn both of them kind of like at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So just like my question is that how do you guys think that someone would be able to like write something without being able to read it?
I think I have an answer to this, but does anyone else want to try?
I mean, I thought that was also interesting because how we learn to read and write now, they're together, it's at the same time. But I guess I kind of just assumed that maybe writing was just more of a visual thing, like purely visual and about understanding like the shapes and the lines, as opposed to, I don't know. But yeah, they also talked about being able to learn to write syllables and then sentences. So is it just like memorization of these syllables and sentences, or you have to read it at least in your head to, I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. What were you going to say, Scott? Like, what was your idea?
So again, in the other reading, like before the codex, it was the papyrus, right? And when they were writing scrolls, they would have scribes. And sometimes these scribes were slaves who didn't know how to read and write. So they just copied the words from a master text. So I would assume, just from copying, you would know like how to write the words, or at least like the characters, but you wouldn't necessarily know what it means, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I kind of figured. Like they just memorize like the characters or like the letters, right?
I think it's hard to stay motivated when you can't read what you're like doing. It's just like what does it mean? Like
Yeah. Well, at that point, it's kind of like just drawing a picture.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Just the visual aspect of it.
So there were all my questions. Yeah, someone else should go.
I had questions for that one, so I could ask mine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think I did. Where did I put them? Oh, okay. So like I kind of sort of like we all said before, we all seem to notice how reading and literacy were linked to power. And I noticed that there was a lot of, I mean, it makes sense because we're talking about people that were in Europe. So obviously, naturally, they're going to value literature from their culture. But I was thinking, like, because there are some people in the academic world or even in literature that still believe that these like classic texts are like the highest valued text, and that's like real literature and should be the most valued. But I'm wondering if those should still hold the same value that they once did now, or is that kind of outdated, and does it ignore the fact that there's other cultures that also have a history of literature? And I don't know if I'm wording this right, but basically do you guys think that like comprehension of these classic texts by like Homer and like these old poets, whatever, should be valued the same, or is it outdated? And yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
I can say what I think, if that kind of helps
Sure.
understand my question a bit better. In my mind, I think that obviously these texts are still valuable, but to kind of put them on this pedestal, I think in a way, I feel like that's kind of related to the pedestal that people put on like European culture and history as being the best.
Oh, okay. I see
You
what
know
you're
what I
getting at.
mean? Yeah, I feel like
Okay.
that. Yeah. Like in my opinion, yes, these texts are important and valuable, but I feel like it's good now that we're in an obviously more globalized world. It makes sense to me that we should value texts
Well,
from Asia or Africa,
I think
whatever.
I think what's important is like why we're reading it, right? Like I think why they read Homer was because um like his stories taught them a lot about how to live and like what's doing the right thing, what's honorable. And I think that probably exists throughout all the cultures, you know, like you probably have within your own culture there's probably been someone who's taught like about the virtues of how to live or like how to be a good person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess in like a Western society, it does make sense that it's still being read because I think it's undeniable that it's had influences in like just everything that's been written or created after it, right? Like that whole like hero's journey thing from uh the whole Odyssey part, like that's kind of how stories are shaped now.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of does take some understanding of that original text to like appreciate what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess for like the morals and values part, like everyone has their own version of that, I guess.
Right.
But the cultural impact is there.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Or even like for example, because you take philosophy, right? You said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you guys ever like? Are all the things that you read essentially European texts?
Um well, it's University of Toronto, so most of the professors here are focused on Western philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there are professors out there that do teach Oriental philosophy.
I see.
Right. And I think like it's not like we don't have Eastern or like
Yeah, I
just
mean, there is the program at our school.
yeah. It's just it's most of the time it was probably in a different language.
Right. True.
And
Okay, true. I didn't think about that.
yeah,
Language.
like it's probably like I because also like most of the like you asked me about philosophy, most of the people that you read are either like ancient Greek, so like the stuff that these people that we're talking about are reading already,
Mm-hmm.
and like more modern is are like still in that European region where the languages are more easily translated.
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of the meaning is probably not lost,
Mm-hmm.
but there's probably more problems with translating like um you know like a I don't know like a Buddhist text to English when all of the expressions are like completely different.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Fair.
what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, but these things were translated from Latin and Greek, and like like the Middle East, they have probably a deep history of philosophical texts, but I think that it's interesting how.
Yeah, and they fought with Europe for a long time.
Okay, didn't know that. Right, true.
So
Yeah, I don't know. And I guess beyond that, my question was, how do I put this? Basically, I noticed in the reading, to me, it sounded like the person writing, they made it seem like there seemed to be a bit of bias in the fact that, like, when he was writing about how simpler texts were being produced, that he made it seem like a negative thing, but maybe that's just how I interpreted the language he used. And
it does sound kind of snobby.
yeah, snobby. That's the word I'm looking for. And
But I think like it's probably not reasonable to ask like every peasant at the time to be able to like, you know, sit down and read all of the, you know, the classical text.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so, you know, you write like a simpler version that just has the like the main ideas of from it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so like basically, I was thinking, um, is there still value like today compared to then? Is there value in the ability to read simpler text, or should like, for example, schools aim to teach kids how to read? I guess we already do. Like we all take Shakespeare, or we have to read like one in high school. I mean, at least a lot of people I know did.
Yeah.
But do you think that like hierarchy is necessary or reasonable, or is it just that any form of reading has value? Does that make sense?
I think if you're studying English, then of course you have to study Shakespeare because, you know, what he did, like the way he wrote, like shaped how we write today.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think your question was more about like the emphasis on Western versus like the values of other places, right?
Yeah, or I'm not very good at wording things, but basically, my emphasis is on the fact that yes, the value on Western over everything else, and the idea that those are like the most advanced.
Mm-hmm.
And then also thinking about how today, because for example, there are people that read like, I don't know, rom-coms or like teen books. Is there value in reading that, being able to read those, or like would you take the approach that like be a bit snobby and like, oh, that's not really real reading? Does that make sense? I don't know why I thought about that, because I just, so much of this reading to me was about like how reading is a privilege. So that made me think about how does that show up in
Well,
our.
I think people are still snobby about like high culture today, right? Like,
Yeah,
so I don't think that's changed.
right.
But like, so I guess in a way it's not as important anymore because I'm pretty sure most of the people don't care about like, you know, finding out about the classic text.
Mm-hmm. True. I mean, most people don't read those things, so.
I think nowadays most people don't even read anything. Like
Yeah.
the most they read is just like one paragraph on their like
They go
social
on
media.
SparkNotes
Yeah, so
and
like
then
if they're gonna read rom-coms, like just it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and also like of course I think we should be more open, and in schools we probably should be taught about like stuff from all around the world more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's only natural that, you know, like we live in Canada and, you know, considering like we were a colony from, you know, from England, like we would have that Western focus, right?
Right.
So
True.
of course it'd be better if we had a like a wider scope, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not unreasonable that that's the case. at least for us.
Fair.
It's for everyone because like I didn't grow up here and I didn't go to high school here.
Uh-huh.
And like
Where did you go to school?
in Iran, yeah, I'm Persian, so like Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
So like I had a almost philosophy course, and it was like all about like how Western philosophy and Western psychology is like created, and like a lot of the things that the prof was saying didn't make sense to me because I didn't grow up here, and I was like, no, it's not like I just disagreed with the prof so much because like the philosophy that I was grown up with was so much different from like Western philosophy. And the prof didn't agree with me because he was like, yeah, no, what are you saying? Like that's not the case. So I think that's the case everywhere. And you know, you can educate yourself about like other places and other like philosophies and other literature, but like I don't think you can completely understand it to the core unless you go and live there for some time, for like
Yeah.
at least a year or more, to actually like know the culture, know the history, know the philosophy, and like understand where those ideas are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that we can be like very critical of that. That why are schools only focusing on Western philosophy or like literature and things because like they're supposed to.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you, even in your school, you where you grew up, that was what you focused on. I'm surprised, kind of. I didn't realize that.
Was your
Yeah.
professor also
No,
Iranian or?
the example that I gave was here in University of
Oh,
Toronto.
okay.
It didn't happen in Iran yet.
Okay.
We
Okay, that
weren't
makes
focused on
sense.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was
They
gonna
were
say
a
that
bit
would be
wrong. Yeah.
interesting if you focused on that
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, but like I was saying, like the culture and like the language is so different. So like it's really hard for someone to take that and completely understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I feel like you like not only do you have to understand the language, you have to understand like the context and like the history
Mm-hmm.
of that certain culture
Yeah.
for you to completely like understand like, oh, why this is being said
Mm-hmm.
and why this makes sense.
Yeah. In the same class, I remember the prof was saying that in English there was like this jump in the literature that they changed that like basically the whole language changed to a scientific type. So like even grammar and even of many of the words in English language are like in scientific format, and that's the thing that did not happen like in my culture and in my language, and everything is like very poetic that to a point that you can't even like write a scientific paper. People write their scientific papers in English in Iran because like our language just doesn't work that way. And 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 I was just like not understanding some of the things that the prof was saying because like yeah, like my mother language isn't like scientific, so like it's it's very complicated, I think.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
It's like a different way of thinking.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
exactly. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I had other texts or questions. Yeah, I mean, well, also I'm thinking like you're saying that we are the Western world, but for example, like I feel like it'd be cool if in our high schools in Canada we read Indigenous texts. Like I never did. The first time I ever read anything by an Indigenous author was in university because I chose to take a class that focused on that, and that's our direct history. So
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Like,
yeah.
I feel like thinking back, like I barely learned anything about like
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the world or like really that much about Canada at all.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting how everything is super Eurocentric,
Right.
and I guess that's more of a shift now. But
I think they're trying, but I don't really think it's any different.
Mm.
I think
It's more like people do it themselves. Sorry.
Yeah.
like even back in high school, I think I learned about like the indigenous people because because I was learning about like colonization and that kind of stuff. Like it wasn't really focused on indigenous peoples and their cultures itself. It was more like, oh, by the way, this is there too. And like it's mostly about the colonization part.
So like it was more like just like, oh yeah, like we did this also.
Yeah.
Like just kind of like a side note, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like we didn't really learn in depth about it that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like my question maybe it's a little bit off topic, but that's just kind of what came to my
No,
mind.
I think
Like the
it's
idea of
really
what is privileged, basically.
I think it's really relative because like right now we're talking about how like reading and education can like assert like a certain influence over like a population, right? Did do you know what I'm saying?
Sorry, I was just writing notes. No,
Okay.
I agree. Yeah.
Because like this is exactly what the reading is talking about, right? Like from the education you shape like what the people think,
Mm-hmm.
and they do that through the reading.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think a big part of like what's being written and what people are reading has to do with like who's in power.
Yeah.
Because like there's that saying that I don't know like the exact saying, but it says that like basically the winner always writes the history. So like yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like it makes sense to me why like they don't focus on indigenous history or like culture, because like they basically eliminated them. Why should they focus on it?
Yeah,
I mean,
like Mein
that's
Kampf.
wrong, but like that's what they're doing.
Yeah, like Mein Kampf is banned because we won, but like if Hitler
Yeah,
won, it wouldn't be banned, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Does anyone else have any questions related to the first reading, or should we like move to the second and third reading?
Well, I focused more on the first one, but like we kind of like touched on the subject a little, like
Okay.
the like role of women, kind of, and like how before literacy like spread, it was more about like men writing about women and not women writing about their own stories and stuff. So I was like, my question was just like how, like why whenever men wrote about women, it was only about like love or like romance. Like why not anything else? Like as if women are just kind of a side character, right?
mhm.
But we kind of like talked about that, so it's okay. We can
Yeah.
like move on.
If anyone wants to answer.
I think we kind of like touched on it like when we talked about like how like how men wanted to like control women and like have power over them.
Mm-hmm.
And also I think that like women didn't have like much of a role at that time, and they were just like there to like I don't know have children and like pleasure men. So like
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense that that's how they're being portrayed.
Right.
Maybe it was different, they just didn't write about it, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of just like a direct reflection of um, how women were viewed at the time. Even now, like that's a huge.
Like even now we talk about like gender roles, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure the roles back then was even worse.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Um,
Any other questions?
I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay.
This is just like a random thought that I had. Do you guys think that maybe less women technically read because the women who were privileged enough to, I guess, read had like a man from working class reading it for them?
I think like wealthy families' children probably knew how to read themselves.
True.
I would assume.
I thought it was interesting how it seems like one of the most privileged things is being read to.
Yeah.
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 Kind of funny. Like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that depends on like how much they followed that like rule of girls not being able to study.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's probably different from like people to people.
Right.
So should we move on to the next reading?
Yeah.
Did you say you have to go at 6, Scott?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I can do it really quick.
Yeah, we can go through the rest quickly.
Okay. So I actually took out a bunch of stuff already. So so just the first, just a short summary. So I'm gonna start with the Roma reading. Or do you want me to start with the philosophy one?
You can start with the one that we have more questions from, so that
Okay.
if we didn't have time to like do the next one, we wouldn't just like lose anything.
Or actually just give me like 5 minutes and then I'll confirm if I have to go at 6.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. I can do 6:30.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So just gonna so do you want to start with the more like the philosophical one or the other one?
Oh, whoops. I guess whichever one you want to do, or whatever one we had more questions for, like said.
Anyone?
We could do the philosophy one since I feel like the other one is more closely related to this topic. Just to
Yeah.
Sure.
be more diverse.
So essentially what the philosophy paper was talking about was so you guys are familiar with like Plato and like Aristotle? Or like you've heard of the names, right?
Yeah.
So like basically the group of philosophers that came after that, they wanted to differ between philosophy as a way of life and philosophical discourse. So philosophy as a way of life is essentially hold on, let me find a quote. Okay. For the ancients, one was a philosopher not because of the originality or abundance of the philosophical discourse which one conceived or developed, but as a function of the way one lived. Above all, the goal was to become better, and discourse was philosophical only if it was transformed into a way of life. So in other words, you had to, so in the past, philosophers were essentially like teachers and scientists. So to them, to be a good philosopher, you have to live the way you teach. And if you didn't do that, you were a sophist and they looked down upon you.
Mm.
And philosophical discourse is what justifies, motivates, and influences that way of life that you choose. And this and these two are inseparable because of three reasons. One, the discourse justifies your choice of life and develops all its implications. So in other words, what you believe is your philosophy, right? So you live your life in that certain way, and the discourse is your reasons. And when someone challenges you, it's that conversation that you have. And then the discourse also allows you to perform actions on yourself and on others. So by participating in this discourse, you are bettering yourself, or you are bettering. So let's say you lose the debate, right? And you can acknowledge that and change your views to better yourself. Or you can, or let's say you have the right view and someone else has the view that you disagree upon, and you win, and you show them that your way is better. That means you've bettered someone else. And then three, the discourse is also a way of exercising your way of life. So back then, philosophers wanted to be good. They were like role models. They were teachers. So the discourse is a way for you to actually do what you're saying. So you're actually teaching the people, you're practicing this way of life. Do you guys understand?
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah. Like practice what you preach kind of thing.
Right. And the way this relates to the reading is going to be about this discourse, because essentially I think what happens is having this having the ability to read and write allows these philosophers to further analyze each other's works and write letters to each other, and also have those debates to better their whatever project that they're working on. And so the second reading, it's about the papyrus. So just a short summary. The first books used in the Mediterranean region were the papyrus scrolls made by the ancient Egyptians. Papyrus means that of the king and is also the name of the plant which it is made from. This plant grew in the swamps of the Nile, and so Egypt was and remained essentially the only country in which papyrus was manufactured, and from where it is shipped to all places around the Mediterranean. Papyrus was the writing material par excellence for texts meant to be read time and again, and it was used in classical and Hellenistic Athens and the Roman Empire. Eventually, it would be replaced by the codex, so we talked about that earlier, and the act of reading has always been associated with education, status, and ideology. And I'm just going to go through a few quotes. So if you have the doc open, do you guys see the picture? The painting?
Yeah.
So
the one they look like they're drinking. Oh no, holding books. Oh, a
Yeah.
book and a roll.
So it's while the husband holds a papyrus roll, thus showing his literacy and noble education, his wife holds a wax tablet, presenting herself as a good housewife who keeps her records carefully.
Mm.
So in the reading, it talks about how the wax tablet is a way to basically write notes or like just rough drafts, because they would carve into the wooden tablet, and this would obviously be really easily changed later. So it wouldn't be used to actually write books with, like the papyrus roll. And then blah blah. Okay, that's not important. For the 6th and 5th centuries, we were dependent on vase paintings, a cup painted by Doris. The aim of these representations is not to show specific books. The interest of the painter is to show a person in the act of reading. In the case of the Doris cup, a man in a schoolroom is reading a text that recalls the Iliad, that being the noblest reading possible for an educated person. The book in the hands of the person reading thus conveys a certain idea of education. So once again, you see that reading is associated with status and nobility. And the book market in antiquity was fundamentally different from our modern book trade in two aspects. First, the market was restricted to only the educated and elite few. Secondly, the production of a book depended on the skill of the scribe, who had to copy the text by hand. The copying process required a master copy, from which the scribe would copy his text. Master copies could come from the private libraries of a friend, or in the 1st century and after, from a public library. And the library at Alexandria was a development of the idea of a book collection that originated in the philosophical school of Aristotle at Athens. Here, the aim of the study had been directed towards the universal knowledge of all visible phenomena in the world. At Alexandria, alongside medicine, geography, the texts of Greek authors too became a main subject of study. So this relates to the philosophy paper. In they wanted to keep these libraries to fulfill their philosophical pursuit of knowledge. So to them, like knowing more stuff meant that you were a better philosopher and you were a good person, and you should always strive to know more. And I think this also relates to Nagine's part about the library and how that opened up reading to some other, at least to the people that knew how to read and write. Okay, this next part's about the distribution. There were no publishers in our modern sense. Bookshop owners were the main source of distribution. They provided copies to sell by using slave labor. There were no copyright laws, and another source of distribution was between the private circles of scholars. So people who wanted to study a certain thing might ask their friend for a copy of a book that they need for their work. So once again, people had their own private libraries, and then this was very exclusive, because you'd obviously have to be educated and elite to be able to have this. And some quotes about culture. At the same time, gymnasia in the cities all around the Mediterranean installed book collections as places of cultural identification. In towns and cities where the majority of inhabitants were not Greeks, but Syrians, Egyptians, or Carians. Like knowledge of the verses of Homer, a collection of books in the Greek language provided a means for cultural identification and status. The first public library in Rome was planned by Julius Caesar for the purpose of establishing Roman literature. So this actually relates to Alice's question earlier, like about like having the Western philosophers being taught elsewhere. So you can see like the Romans established their library so that these Greek and Roman writers, so these foreigners to them would read their writing,
Mm-hmm.
and in turn, like they would be, a part of their uh, like culture, and um, be reigned by them essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, they are admitting like, oh, this is like a better culture, or like this is the dominant culture.
Yeah, dominant is a good word.
And then some more quotes about status. In the Hellenistic period, libraries become status symbols of monarchs. Many wealthy individuals founded libraries as a monument of their generosity. Celsus, a rich man in Ephesus, founded a library in which he also wanted to be buried. The library had become not only a public space, but also a sacred place. Again, you had to be wealthy. And then some examples of what they were reading. One of the most common texts in Egyptian culture was a collection of spells, rituals, declarations, and hymns known as the Book of the Dead. Homer was studied in schools, and to know parts of the Homeric epics by heart was considered essential to the education of a respectable man. However, books still belong to the higher ranks in society only if you, the texts read in schools determine the taste and reading habits of adults. So yeah, we covered the part about the schools as well. Inhabitants who regarded themselves as educated and aimed at belonging to a certain class were reading Homer, the tragedians, and the orators. The novel, a new literary form that came into being around the rum of the first century, can be considered as a form of text that gives even those who are less educated and are unable to understand and enjoy the great works something to read. Eventually, the Bible had, between the 4th and 5th century, become the main text for education. And I think we covered this already. And just lastly, some quotes about religion. It is striking that the change from roll to codex goes hand in hand with the change from pagan religions to Christianity. Here, ideological motives may be important besides the practicality of the new form. So the practicality of the new form is what Nadine was talking about, how the codex can, you can read it any way you want. Like you can fold it, it's the scroll was harder to store. It was easier to break, and, harder to hold as well. The Old Testament, the holy book of the Jews, had always been written on rolls. Christians may have wanted their holy book to look different from the Torah. And that's all the quotes that I found interesting. There's like another part about what the rolls look like and how it's made. I don't know if you want to hear about that.
I think I had a part in my reading about like how the rolls are made.
Yeah.
I just didn't talk about it.
Okay. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, so like I said, one of my questions was about reading and writing as a way of maintaining power, but I think we went over that already. Another question was, to what extent are the skills of reading and writing essential if most of the people couldn't do so?
I think it's essential because the ones that not that other people aren't important, but the important ones, the ones that wrote history and the ones that were of higher class and the ones that were like deciding for people, they knew how to read. So like it was essential in that term, because even if those people didn't know how to write or read, then we wouldn't know anything about those signs, and we wouldn't have anything to shape our culture and our like life now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I guess my question was like, just if it was really only available, like if reading and writing was only available to like the elite few, like does it, like how much does it really affect like a regular peasant's life, you know?
Like at in those signs, like
Yeah, like
if
to
if
them, was it really that important to learn it?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it really has to do with like how politics worked back then as well. Like as we mentioned before, back then only like the few elite made all the decisions, and like nowadays everyone, especially in Canada, everyone like votes and we all get to contribute into a decision somehow. But back then that wasn't really a choice, and it wasn't really like people were more focused on like, oh, how am I gonna get dinner for tomorrow, rather than like the
Yeah.
future, I guess.
I think that it affected their lives indirectly, like basically what you're saying, Kaylee, where it's just the people in power, even though, yeah, I mean, it's all what we've been saying the whole time about like privilege and that relating to literacy. Yeah, so I don't know what I'm saying. When you say how much did it affect like the average person's life, do you mean
Like I would assume at this point they're still living by like oral traditions, right?
okay.
So like like obviously not being able to read and write meant that you wouldn't be able to become like a person, like an authority, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But like in a society where like you wouldn't have been able to do that anyways, like I guess how much does that really matter?
I think um, for like a peasant who like has to live day by day, and like all they have to care about is whether like they'll be able to like eat the next meal, that wouldn't matter. But I think in a larger context, like for young people, it did matter a little bit, and it did affect them because there was a rise in literacy. So when there's a rise, it means that people want to learn. And there was also a prestige with like carrying books and like knowing how to read. So maybe some people who were like more middle class, maybe those people were more encouraged to learn how to
True.
write and read. But like the people who were from like lower classes, they weren't like affected as much. Maybe.
Yeah, there was a quote that I didn't include. It was something along the lines of like only the major cities in these civilizations would have been more concerned with reading, where the rural areas like didn't really bother themselves with it at all.
I think even nowadays there are places that there are like a lot of people who don't know how to read, or
Mm-hmm.
a lot of women don't know how to read. But nowadays, with like everything that is happening and all the technology, so it makes sense that at those times, like a lot of people weren't affected by reading
Mm-hmm.
that much.
Any other thoughts, or should I move on?
Mm, I
I
can't
guess I'll
think of
move on.
anything. Yeah, I can't think of
Okay.
anything.
What do books symbolize today, and are there any similarities or differences?
I feel like there's a pretty big difference because now today, reading is a lot more about just like personal enjoyment, whereas then it was very directly related to profession or politics. Yeah, I mean,
I think also like I guess I wanted to relate this to the like previous question. Like today, like reading and writing is kind of a necessity now.
Yeah.
Like if you don't know how to read and write, you're at a really big disadvantage.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas before, like no one knew how to read and write, you know?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean,
I
go.
also agree with you. Sorry, that you say that people now read more for pleasure. I think that like reading is just so like normal to us that
Mm-hmm.
like we're reading all the time, like for school, for like when we're going out, when we're buying something, we're doing that all the time. But like it's so mainstream that we don't even like refer to like other types of reading as reading. We're
Mm-hmm.
just doing it, and when we're saying reading, the first thing that pops up into our mind is just like, yeah, oh yeah, I'm just like reading a book. So like that should be for like pleasure, or maybe I'm studying. So I think that's the difference that happened today. That it's just like because it's everywhere, we don't even like notice it a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, now like basic literacy at least is necessary because
Yeah.
we're interacting with words all the time, like ads or most people have phones. We have to be able to read some at some level. Whereas then, I guess most of what they were doing, like focusing on agriculture, and they didn't have to read.
Yeah.
Even our communication is like reading, because when we text each other, we're
Mm-hmm.
basically reading. So, and like a lot of my personal communication is just texting. So
Yeah.
like if you take that from me, and if I couldn't read, then it would be like really hard. I just had to call
Mm-hmm.
everyone. Yeah.
Um, were you more curious about what books specifically symbolize? Is that what you said?
Well,
Or
yeah, because I mean, in the reading, it was about how like with the painting and the vase, like when people are posed with like a book with a scroll, like they're seen as being intellectuals, right?
mm-hmm.
Or like that symbolizes how wealthy they are. So like I guess like um does that still hold true for people today, or like
I think it does in the sense that like because now reading is more of like a personal enjoyment thing. I feel like the idea of reading being linked to wealth makes sense because you need to have free time to do that, and if people in lower class are working whatever hard more hours, I don't know why I'm losing my train of thought. Basically, yeah, the idea of having just more leisure time
mm-hmm.
to read, I feel like that reflects the link between wealth and books, the value of books as being an upper class thing.
Well, like I was thinking, like I agree with you. I was thinking along the lines like I've heard a lot of people say like in order to be cultured, you have to read.
Mm-hmm.
So like I guess books still do kind of symbolize like that kind of being educated, or you know, like like some of the symbols that we associated with from the past is still here today.
Symbols are definitely still here, but I think that they're not as strong because majority of people like can read, or like are educated, or like have books in their houses. But I still think that if you like have a like large library in your house and you just like post a picture of it, that would show like that you're from like high status.
Mm-hmm. And also to be able to read, like that's linked to better education. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's definitely still related to wealth. I don't know if I'm understanding your question the way you mean it, but
Like I guess like if you had a photo shoot, right? Like why would you want your model to be holding a book? Like what would that represent?
okay.
Or like if you were, you know, like drawing a cartoon, like why, like what does that book mean, I guess?
I think that was like at that time, like that was like a sign of like to show that you were very prestigious and you were like very like wealthy and like of high class. Like I don't know what's like I don't right now I don't know what's the symbol of that. Like if you have like I don't know a like very expensive car, like you would pose with that. I
Yeah.
think the book was like that expensive car back then. You would just like showing off, yeah, I have a book, like I'm so high status.
Right. Maybe it was
Maybe.
more valuable then in
Yeah.
that case.
Or like
Maybe,
I was, yeah,
yeah,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, you, because I still feel like I'm
Okay.
misinterpreting the question.
Or like today, like sometimes, you know, in movies, like if you're a nerd, you have to hold a book and you have to wear glasses, you know, like those are the tropes that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So
But
like,
nowadays it's for nerds, it's not for like people of high
yeah,
status.
yeah. So like sometimes nowadays it has like a somewhat negative meaning to it. Whereas before it was always like, if you have a book, then you've made it.
Mm.
I think it's because like our culture is going backwards and we're like valuing things we aren't supposed to. So yeah.
I think mm, what, like, kind of adding on what you're saying about us going backwards, now we're so much more focused on um I don't like no I don't I feel like I'm that point wasn't going to make sense, so never mind. What I was going to say is that we're more focused on distractions now, as opposed to maybe valuing intelligence,
Yeah, we're constantly
whatever
distracted
that,
right now.
yeah. um so yeah, I guess there's like a shift in what is valued. So the idea of a nerd being able to read, and that's sometimes looked down upon because it, I don't know, maybe it means that they don't have friends, or like they,
I mean that makes sense because like we're social animals, so like the
yeah.
social part is like very important for us. So that someone who just reads books and is like alone all the time, it makes sense to like not be like the standard for everyone because being social is the most important thing for us naturally. But like back then, it wasn't associated with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And also back then, reading, like the reading said, was a social thing. Like people would go to
Yeah,
these
yeah.
auditoriums and someone would read, and that's how you meet people or whatever. So maybe the values are still the same. It's about how you're viewed, and in a way
Oh,
maybe
but
popular. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, it makes sense. I just all of a sudden had another question.
mm-hmm.
Do you think being able to read made that experience less social? Because
Made
now
me
you're just reading by yourself, right? Like whereas before you might have to go to like an auditorium to hear this guy teach you about or tell you about Homer or like teach you about whatever with like other audiences. Whereas
what
now
do you
you're just reading by yourself.
What do you mean made what experience less social?
The experience of reading.
Yeah.
So you're saying, do you think being able to read made the experience of reading
You're
less
changing the way you read, basically, like
Yeah.
changing from that like performance part that you read for someone and everyone listen, which is like almost like theater, and changing that to like reading by yourself silently, because the other
Yeah.
one is like super social, but this one is like very isolated.
Yeah, because now, like, when you read, you just read by yourself, right? Like, you don't.
Yeah, read out loud to
Yeah.
people. Yeah. I'm not sure when that like change happened, that
Mhm.
we shifted completely from reading out loud to like reading to yourself silently, but I think that may have played a role on how we value things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have one last question.
Hmm.
So as codices replace the papyrus, do you think we'll ever go paperless and just completely replace books?
I hope
Yeah.
not.
I hope not, but I think we will in like, I don't know, 50 years.
Yeah.
I think that if we do, it will be maybe linked to an environmental reason.
Yeah,
But
for
besides
environment
that, I think there's always going to be a desire for the physical
thing. Yeah.
reading. Maybe, I don't know. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I always want to say
Like,
no.
we actually like talked about this in like 228, like the whole like development of like paper to like ebooks and like whatnot, right? But our professor said that like seeing like or like analyzing like the history and all that, he doesn't think that we will go paperless, because even after ebooks were introduced, like there was still like this desire to go back to like the physical like paper book, because that's what people like that's the original whatever, right? Like it's nice to have like that physical aspect of it. So I don't know, he mentioned that like he really doesn't believe that we'll ever go paperless, because there will always be like that demand for it. So
Right.
yeah, like unless it's for like environmental reasons.
Well,
I don't think so.
imagine when like a tablet is as cheap as like a flip phone in the future, or like as cheap
Right.
as a notebook in the future. You know, like
Right.
there's
I think
just I don't know.
I think there will be books, but there would be just like in like some libraries, and like the main way people read would be like online with like tablets or like other things.
Mhm.
But there will be still books, but like very limited. And I
Yeah,
think
maybe.
that like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I just wanted to talk about like changing from the role to codex, and like maybe when that change happened, people were like, no, I like the role better, I understand it better, I know how to work with it. But like, because it took like several centuries to completely change from the role to the codex. So I think that maybe like several centuries from now, maybe we completely move on from like
Yeah.
physical books, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, I also had a class where the professor, he showed us like basically the numbers of book sales versus ebook sales when the ebook kind of came out. And he said that initially when ebooks came out, there was like a jump in ebook sales and maybe like a slight decline in sorry, it's so loud outside. A slight decline in sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear that. I just wanted to wait. A slight decline in like actual physical books, but then eventually the ebook sales kind of just plateaued and both leveled out. But I guess when you say that, it does make sense that eventually we will be paperless, because we've seen, like you said, that happen with the change from the roll to the codex. Yeah, that would be sad though. Maybe it'll be that books will go back to being like even more
Valuable.
where like, or maybe they're more expensive because they're rarer and they're not being made as much because we don't have the resources or whatever. I could see that happening.
Yeah. Vintage bookshops.
Yeah, something like that where
like rare book libraries and stuff.
Yeah. Like if there's ever a day where like books aren't made at all, and to be able to own one would be like a symbol of wealth or status, because you can afford to buy this thing that's not even being made anymore. It'll be sad if there's no more books.
It would feel full circle if that happens. We're just
yeah,
valuing, not valuing, valuing everything.
yeah, because at the end of the day, it's so easy to make now and so much cheaper, so it's a lot more accessible. But I can definitely see that maybe one day, for the sake of the environment, people will decide, okay, well, this isn't a necessity. We have ebooks, so.
Oh, and now like ebooks just read themselves to you. Like you don't even have to read it anymore.
Yeah.
You just have to listen.
Yeah, we're going backwards.
Yeah.
Oh, are you sure? Yeah. Oh. Okay.
Do you guys think that listening to audiobooks is the same as reading a book? Or do
No.
you guys think that reading a book is like more valued as listening to the audiobook?
I'm biased.
It's definitely different.
It's funny because before, when you were saying, or even I pointed it out, but you were saying, Scott, how there still exists this snobbish idea of certain things being valued over others in terms of reading and writing. But then when I think about it, even I have that idea where it's like an audiobook isn't the same as reading an actual book. And in a way, that's definitely a snobby thing to think, because people take in information in different ways. So
I don't know. For me, it's more about the utility. So like, if I'm doing something but I want to listen to a book in the background, it's perfect. But if I really want to focus on something, then I'll probably read it myself.
Right. I mean, I think the idea of audiobooks is really cool because it makes literature so much more accessible, because I feel like it acknowledges the fact that reading isn't for everyone, but they should still be able to enjoy reading or texts if they want to. What were you going to say? Oh.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh. Yeah. What, do you guys use audiobooks? I don't think I've ever listened to one.
I do use audiobooks.
I've listened to like the entire Harry Potter in audiobook format.
That's cool.
Because I've never read it before.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good book to listen to.
Audiobook, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. But I'm not sure if I should say that the books that I've listened to are like listed as the books that I've read. I don't know. I'm just like, is it that, or is it more like the movies that I saw?
I think
which one is it?
I think like because you just like raised up a good point. Like, you know, when you read by yourself, like that voice that you hear in your head, like that's what you think the story should sound like, right?
Yeah.
But in an audiobook, oftentimes I find like I really don't like what the reader sounds like.
For audiobooks, is it I guess it's just one person reading the whole thing. It's not like characters, they have different voices, right?
Sometimes that person makes voices
right,
differently.
Cool. cool.
But it's like, I don't know, it's like your dad reading to you before bed.
Right.
It's something like that, yeah. It's kind of
That
nice.
considered reading? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's now that I'm thinking about it, like audiobooks, that's in a way things going full circle and going back to how back then reading was like a performance thing and people would listen to someone read. And it seemed like reading then was a more in a way intimate thing where that's how people were able to connect. And I guess in a way, like if you think about it more abstractly, like you're sort of connecting with this person you don't know that's like reading to you, which is a pretty intimate thing, but it's just like
but do you
digital.
think you're connecting with the person reading to you, or do you think you're connecting with the text?
I feel like both, like the writer, the person reading. Yeah.
Really? Like
what I
even
would
if the
think.
reader is not the one who wrote it?
Yeah, because sometimes people will have the authors themselves reading their
I mean,
text.
like,
I mean, because in a way, it's like an actor playing a role. Like you're kind of connecting to that like the person as the medium, like getting the message across. You know what I mean? I would say that in a way, it's like connecting to the reader or the person doing the audio book.
mm,
If you disagree,
If you like
I,
the voice of the reader, you should. I mean, I'm able to. It's like I think like my friend is reading it to me, like a friend that has a really nice voice. So it's like
yeah,
it's kind of like the same as listening to podcasts. It's like you think you're sitting with your friends who you don't know who are having a discussion and you're like listening to them.
yeah,
So
or
it's
like,
just
you know
like
how people are always really attracted to those like announcer voices?
yeah.
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 Yeah, I mean, for me, I would definitely say that you're kind of connecting in a different way. Because, yeah, like you said, podcasts, people feel connected to the people they're listening to podcasts. I mean, even
But
though
I
I guess
think,
it's because they're making their own
so
content.
sorry, I think like what I'm kind of disagreeing upon is like, you know, like in a podcast, the person speaking is speaking for themselves.
Mm,
Yeah.
But like if you're being read someone else's idea and the reader isn't actually like adding anything of their own,
right.
do you connect with the reader or do you connect with the author?
I think for me it's like 80% I connect with the author, but like 20% with the reader if I really like the reading. But if I don't like care about like who's reading or like if they're not doing that good of a job, then I'm just listening for the author.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the case for me.
That makes sense. I mean, definitely you're connecting to the author more, but there still is that you're still at the end of the day listening to this person. So even if it's just 10% that you're connecting to the reader, it's still something. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions or things they want to talk about?
I had a question about like the first dossier that we're supposed to submit on Friday. So are we supposed to like submit it as a whole, like all of us submit one thing, or like should we do it separately?
Just one person submits it for everyone.
Like the last one?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
I had a question, like, because I'm I'm the one
Right.
like assembling it this week. How do you guys want me to do it? In terms of like, do you want me to first write the summaries and then the questions, or do you want me to do like a summary of one reading, the questions and answers for that? I just don't really know how to I know you guys wanted to format it in like the article way, but just to make sure, I just want to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you guys like me to do that?
Wouldn't it be easier if we just put all the summaries and all like the questions together? Just because like our topics were kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe just like all the summaries and then just whatever we conversed about.
Okay. And then in terms of the article format, should it be that like I'm basically writing an article like, oh, I'm gonna say it. Like saying, oh, this text, and then it was about this, and then like, is it just a bunch of paragraphs or like dot notes or how? Yeah.
I think
I guess for the summaries, like short paragraphs should be good.
Uh-huh.
And then I guess like you can have like a Q&A little section. Then that can just be like bullet points.
Yeah. Or maybe it's better. So like so like you have the summary, right? And then because I think we hit a couple of like major points today,
Mhm.
right? So maybe just separate that and just have the conversation that went on. So like Nadine said this, and then Alice replied with blah blah blah. Like, but like,
no, that's a little hard because like you had to make
I
like,
tried to write some people's,
but like, did you make note of who said what?
oh,
there's
true.
some
That's
things.
hard.
I don't
Yeah.
know who, I forget who the note writer is, but
Oh, I recorded the whole thing, so I can like write it down
That's
and send it to Alice or like post it on the document by like maybe tomorrow morning. I'll try.
you don't
I
have to write it down. Can't you just send the like recording?
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like it doesn't feel like I'm doing that much if I just send like the video. So I feel like I should contribute by
I think we should like figure out which parts of the conversation are the most important.
Mhm.
So you only quote like like a few of them at a time. So like you're not just quoting the entire thing, right? That's too long, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could say like, oh, this question was asked, and
or like it doesn't even have to be like a cohesive conversation of quotes, just like the interesting quotes that were said.
Mhm.
So like you would have the summary and then like and then this specific topic and then the stuff that we said and then this topic and then a few quotes.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
think one idea would be like you just say that like this question was asked, and then you just like write about the general answer, and like while you're writing that, you like insert the like interesting quotes or like the quotes that were like very critical to that answer. Like I don't know, one or two of them, not that many.
Okay.
And then yeah, I think that would be easier than like writing the whole conversation is like more interesting, but I think it's a lot of work, and like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting quotes are probably better.
Yeah.
And then visually, did you guys wanted like it to look like a paper or like like a newspaper thing? Is that what? No, I don't know if that's what you guys
How would
want.
you do that?
Oh, I thought because we were saying how we wanted it to be like an amateur.
Let's not put too much stress on like the appearance, I guess.
Okay, cool. Because I was like,
Yeah.
how to do that.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you guys wanted that. If
That's a
anything,
lot of work.
I'll write it and then send it to you guys, and you guys can fix it and if someone knows how to do those things and if they want to, they can. But I don't know.
I think like if the that's just my opinion, but I think if the prof doesn't want us something like that, like why would you
I feel like
do
Yeah.
the extra work? So
Like I just suggested the article thing as like a way to format it.
yeah.
in terms of the writing.
Yeah, in terms of like how we
Okay.
organize the flow, but like
Okay, that makes sense.
yeah.
Okay.
I guess essentially it would still be a Word doc, but just like
Okay, that makes
it's
sense to me then.
organized in a specific way.
Okay, cool. I will try to do that by probably Thursday morning, if that's okay, or tomorrow night.
I don't like pressure yourself. Like give yourself
Okay,
time to.
I know.
Like,
Well, because
do
it's due
it, yeah.
Friday. I know, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'll try to.
Even
make
if you do it by Friday morning, it's okay because we can all look at it
Mhm.
by like
Yeah,
Friday.
exactly.
6 p.m. Yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, Kaylee, you don't have to do the notes by tomorrow morning. That's pretty soon. Even like tomorrow night or Thursday is fine.
Okay.
I have like some of the notes too, so we can like work on it together. So
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, I think that's good.
yeah, I think that's all for now.
All right.
Okay.
It was nice talking to you guys.
Yeah. Thanks for all that time we spent together.
I have like two more. Two
Yeah,
more?
yeah.
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 All right.
And then when should we start organizing for the next one?
Did you guys want to do it in the same way where we how about we post questions by like Tuesday and then meet on Wednesday and finish it by Sunday? Oh wait, no. We want to do it the same way, right? Finish it by Friday.
No, I think we finished
We
by
don't
Friday
have to
because
finish
this
up
week
by
is due.
We have a deadline, but like for
The
the
next two.
next two, the deadline is at the like end of the
The
term.
course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when do you guys prefer to like talk about it next week or post the questions and passages?
I guess we can just continue doing like every Tuesday,
Okay.
right? Tuesdays.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So I'm gonna go, guys.
All
I
right.
have to study.
Bye, guys.
See you next
Bye.
week.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you.